is Rahul Saravate. I am an assistant professor in history in the Division of Humanities and Languages at Ahmedabad University. And I'm immensely pleased to welcome all of you here for this engaging and hopefully also entertaining conversation about history. So let me broadly tell you about the purpose of this conversation to begin with. We have two broad distinctions within this. The 1.5 hours are divided into two broad aspects. One is to talk about the thematic concerns. And the other one is, of course, to talk about the programmatic aspects of history. What do I mean by thematic here is this question that I have been asked too many times in my own life, and I have been struggling to answer that question is, why do we study history? Why is it even important? What exactly it is? And so that's something that I don't know if we have, we all of us may have very different answers to the question and may have very different associations with that theme as well. But I think it is something that we all struggle to reflect on, to deal with, to understand. And this is in some sense also in our collective journey, as well as a journey that is very professional in an academic sense, but also very personal, very subjective, very individual journey as well. So we would like to talk a little bit about that, the question of why history, why should one study history, and what exactly it is. And so therefore, the programmatic part will like to reflect on what do we do when we say we do history. How is the history program structured and organized at Ahmedabad University? And what do we offer here? How is that going to benefit you irrespective of your disciplines and your major disciplines or your broad desires in terms of professional thinking? So we would hopefully cater to some of these aspects. I would like to quickly introduce our speakers today. We have some very, very interesting and eminent personalities in history with us today. Let me first welcome Professor Maya Jasanoff. Maya is the Coleridge Professor of History at Harvard University and a visiting professor here in the Humanities and Language Division at Ahmedabad University. Some of you may have actually listened to her in conversation to Professor French, where she discussed her very acclaimed work, a biographical work on Joseph Conrad, titled as The Dawn Watch, Joseph Conrad in a Global World, which won the prestigious Gundil History Prize in 2018. Some of her other works also are equally interesting, if not more. Edge of Empire, Lives, Culture and Conquest in the East, 1750 to 1850, which was published in 2005. And Liberty's Exiles, American Loyalists in the Revolutionary World, which was published in 2011. I would like to welcome Maya again. We also have Aparajit Ramnath, Professor Aparajit Ramnath, who is an associate professor in the Division of Humanities and Languages here. Aparajit has a PhD from Imperial College London, and his publications include The Birth of an Indian Profession, Engineers, Industry and the State, 1900 to 1947, which was published by the Oxford University Press in 2017. Aparajit, whose training actually was also in engineering, would like to talk about his journey from engineering to history and his reflection on engineering as an outsider now as well. So welcome, Aparajit. We also have amongst us Professor Manmohini Datta, who has a PhD in history from the University of Texas at Austin. Her research areas are rooted in pre-modern Indian history and span the fields of law and religion, Dharmashastra, Sanskrit texts. Her current research focuses on inheritance, property, and women's conceptual positions in the Dayabhanga, an influential specialized treatise on inheritance from medieval Bengal, located within the Brahminical legal tradition of the Dharmashastras. Very warm welcome to Manmohini as well.
Thank you, Rahul. Just quickly, my PhD is in Asian cultures and languages, just for the thing.
Okay.
And our dean is here.
Okay, excellent. I'm very happy to see that. Hello, Patrick.
Hi, Rahul. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. And I'm glad to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you. Let me also welcome Professor Murari Kumar Jha, who has a PhD in history from Leiden University in the Netherlands His specializations are in the economic and environmental history of the Mughal Empire in early modern period, briefly between 1500 to 1800. He's interested in exploring economic and political changes in South Asia by taking global transformation into consideration as well. Unfortunately, we do not have another member of our department who's Aparajita Basu today because she is, I think, affected by COVID. She's not very well, but I hope that she would be here for subsequent conversations with you. Without any further ado, I think let me quickly go to Professor Jasanoff to ask her to begin her speech. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rahul. And it's great to see so many of you on this call. I won't talk for a hugely long time because I think one of the aims of this session is really to give you a sense of the other faculty, the range of faculty here at AU in the history department, and also to offer many chances for us to answer your questions. But I thought that maybe I could start this session by sharing with you a video that I helped to make in my home institution, Harvard in the US, when we as a department were also trying to convey to students some of the value of studying history. So I'm going to share with you this video. It's about 2.5 minutes long. Let me share my screen. And please, if somebody on the other end can message me if there's any sort of problem you have with seeing it or hearing it, let me know. Otherwise, I will assume it's okay. And here we go.
We know each week more than we knew the preceding week about the totality of the human past. Every week, what we know is increasing. It's absolutely extraordinary.
One of the great things about history is everything has a history.
It is the most capacious of all the disciplines. Everything that has ever happened is part of the study of history. And I don't think you can say that about any other discipline.
It is really a unique department.
I think history really provides a foundation for being a citizen in a global world. You know, it may sound hokey, but I think the field of history really came of age with the nation state, and it taught people how to belong in a collective society. And I think now that we live in a global society, it's more than ever important for us to know something about where we come from, where we're at, and hopefully it equips us to make better decisions about where we're going in future.
So each of us in the history department has a special proclivity to a certain kind of history, whether it's social history or economic history or political history. I see myself as a cultural historian. I'm interested in how people thought about themselves, how they transmitted ideas, communicated with each other in the past.
So I'm a passionate believer in biography as a genre. It's a great way into any topic, even if you don't know much about it. And when you do know something about it, it always adds, because the vantage point of the individual is in many ways the authentic vantage point of historical study.
No matter where your interests take you, there is a historical angle.
We pay a lot of attention to writing. Some of us may work in the laboratory now, but we still insist that our prose be well crafted. And so our history concentrators come out with a lot of experience working with professional writers.
I find it really fascinating to see students discover their own power to tell new stories about the past.
And also the essential tools of critical analysis and critical thinking that will enable you to take on whatever you want to take on in the future.
We like to think that the roads leading out of history are infinite in number. And if you look at what our students have been doing in recent decades, I think that the evidence suggests that that's accurate.
Okay, so that was a little bit of a historical artifact itself, as you could tell by the fact that I looked much younger, which is a little bit terrifying to me. But I think that what that video does is touch on a number of the kinds of things that both I and some of my colleagues here will want to talk about with you today. The different kinds of approaches to the study of the past in particular, and the kinds of things that you, if you choose to study history, might be able to add to your skill set as you move into whatever sorts of futures you imagine for yourself. One thing I want to start out by pointing out, however, is that there was something in that video that you may have noticed wasn't mentioned at all. And that is anything about names and dates. Now, why is this funny? Well, because for the most part, when history is taught in secondary schools, and I think that this is as much the case in the US or in Europe as it is in India, it is often taught as a kind of list of names and dates and terms that you're supposed to learn, you know, the names of the kings, the names of the emperors, the names of the big figures, and you get tested on your ability to recite lists of terms back and make certain kinds of identifications. There's a definite sort of knowledge acquisition side of history, which has to do with just kind of taking on board these sorts of data points. And yet, I think that in a way, this approach to the study of history really reflects an image problem that the field has. What do I mean by this? Well, history is way more than just a list of names and dates. I think a better way to think about it is really to think about history as a kind of science, if you will. History is no more reducible to the dates you'll see on a timeline or the list of names you might see in a history textbook than, for example, biology is to a list of the names of the parts of a cell or to the kinds of molecules that are in it. To understand history is to understand a complex system. And that complex system that we study as historians is nothing less than the complex system of the human experience. History is, I think, incontestably the biggest data field that is out there. Absolutely everything that happened on any scale constitutes part of the field of study that we have as historians. And so what we learn to do and what we practice doing as historians or students of history is understanding how to process big data, how to take things out from that, and how to create meaning from this data to understand how systems work. There's another part of history that I want to emphasize. I've just said that history could be thought of in some ways as a kind of science. And in fact, in many universities, it's even in the West at least, kind of considered a social science alongside economics in particular as a way of kind of looking at the human experience in a kind of methodical and systematic way. But at the heart of the word history is, of course, something else, and that is the term story. At the heart of every history, there is a story. Once upon a time, the opening words of sort of the traditional kind of bedtime story is, after all, leading you to the past. And just think about the widespread use of the term story in our experiences as humans here in the 21st century. People are always telling stories about themselves, whether it's to, in the US, for example, to apply to college, you're supposed to write an essay all about yourself. It's telling the story of yourself. You tell stories about yourself to make friends whenever you meet them. You tell stories about yourself sometimes to apply for a job, to give a kind of narrative of sort of who you are and what your accomplishments are. You tell stories about yourself if you want to enter into various kinds of public arenas, politics, and so on. History as a story is, after all, what is going on all the time on, for example, social media. What does Instagram have? Instagram has stories, and those stories are part of the narrative that you're creating about yourself, that you're putting out there into the world, chronicling your experience. Facebook, much the same way. And after all, what do we call the news? What is the news called when we refer to items in the news? We refer to them as news stories. So story is a ubiquitous feature of the way that we communicate about the world around us. And one further element of this I just want to highlight for you is the role of storytelling in business. I'm sure some of you on this call are interested in or already studying in commerce or management and might be imagining a career in business. And the ability to tell a story, compelling story about your company, about your idea, about your product, this is a central part of any kind of business career. Now, so much so that there are many, courses and books and so on dedicated to the art of business storytelling. So why am I emphasizing this? Well, story is a central part of history, and story is a central part of the human experience, especially now in the 21st century. What that means in turn is that learning how to tell stories, to tell good stories, to tell effective stories, can be crucial for your future. Learning how to analyze stories, the stories that people are telling to you, can help make you a better decision maker. Everyone has a story, and what the study of history helps us do is to figure out which ones are true, which ones are effective, and why. And when we're students of history, this is one of the major kind of arenas that we are engaging with. Now, I said just at the outset that I think history has an image problem. People think that it's all just sort of a list of names and dates, when in fact it's about this robust and dynamic and incredibly complex and engaging arena of human experience. There's one other part of the image problem that I think that history has. You could call it a second image problem. That is that people think that history is only about the past. There's a slightly humorous kind of rendition of how people might think about the past. It doesn't really matter. Some stuff happened. There was a period of boom, and now here we are all, swapping videos on TikTok of cats or puppies or whatever it may be. Who really needs to know about any of that stuff in the past? People think history is just about the past. And after all, when the pace of change, as we're all experiencing it right now in our lives, is as fast as it is, it may seem like the past is even less relevant than ever. But I think this is a fundamental misconception about what history is and what the study of history can do for you as a citizen, as a mind, as a student, and more. And that is that what history is really about is the study of time, of being in time. And all of us exist in time. It's a dimension of our experience, that of our communities, that of our nations, that of our planet. History is the study of time, and as such, it is as much about the present, indeed even the future, as it is about the past. Every single one of us is a historical actor, in the sense that every single one of us moves through time. I like this quote from Ernest Hemingway: "Today is only one day in all the days that will ever be. But what will happen in all the other days that ever come can depend on what you do today." It could be that something that you see today will stick with you and guide you for, the coming week, month, year, and beyond. It might be that somebody that you meet today will become a friend of yours for a long time to come. It might be that something that happens in the world today will end up having ramifications for many of us, either immediately or in the future. And what's more, not only are we all sort of living in history and all of us historical actors, we are also all, whether we know it or not, historians in a manner of speaking. That is because we are all making decisions all the time on the basis of the evidence that we have before us, and we are all the time facing or assessing the consequences of our choices as they are made in the element of time. So for me, one of the best things, and this is the last point I'm going to make, one of the best things about the study of history is that you can come to it from any number of directions, and you can take from it any number of contributions. This was touched on in the video, so I'd like to just circle back by alluding to some of those ways. You could be quantitative in your study of the past. One of the things that the era of certain forms of computing and data analysis has opened up for us is the ability to do certain sorts of large-scale studies about the past on the basis of large data sets. I know of people, for example, who are doing really interesting work where they're scraping information off of things like national censuses, and they're able to take this stuff and then use it to direct much more targeted kinds of research. So you could approach it in a quantitative way. This is, of course, particularly relevant for people who are interested in economic history, which is hugely significant for people who are wishing to make predictive kinds of assertions about economic change and economic patterns going forward. You might, on the other hand, approach history through very different kinds of means. You might do it through, say, cultural objects. You can study history through, for instance, the production and generation of, say, popular culture, movies, television, film, books, all sorts of cultural artifacts that you might want to be able to sort of study closely in order to get some insight into the imaginative worlds of people in the past. You might want to look at these sorts of things to help understand why it is that we have the belief structures that we do today. Yet another arena of history has to do with the circulation of ideas. You might want to look, for example, at how ideas about, for example, democracy or secularism or equality came to have a role in the political systems and structures that govern different parts of the world. And finally, you could look at history as one of the speakers, my former colleague, Professor Neil Ferguson, mentioned in that video. You might want to look at history through the realm of significant individuals. Biography, which is one of the most popular kinds of books that people read of nonfiction, is also a kind of history. So there are all kinds of ways that we can analyze the past, the present, with implications for the future, using quantitative data, cultural artifacts, and scales on which we can do this as well. So let me just wrap up by saying, in answer to the question, why history? Why should we study history? To answer for you, at least as a starting point for the rest of this afternoon's discussion, to say that you can't move into the future without getting some sort of grip on the past. And the reason to study history is that it equips you with the ability to assess this fundamental dimension in all of our lives, the dimension of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, for this wonderful, wonderful introduction to why should one study history. I recollect this talk that I heard from Hussein Haqqani, the Pakistani ambassador to the United States once. And in the dialogue, he was addressing the American audience, where he says, I too often hear in the United States that when people say, oh, but that's history. And what they actually mean by this is that that's irrelevant. And I think this is very, very important to identify this, that time is the central important dimension of the experience which history allows us to connect and understand and reflect upon. Thank you so much. This is also a good point to go to Prajit, who would like to sort of also talk a little bit about his personal journey to history. Welcome, Prajit.
Thank you, Rahul, and thank you, Maya, for that wonderful introduction, which talked about really what the endeavor of history is all about, what it can help us with, what its different dimensions are, why it's not that boring old thing that some of us learned to hate when we were growing up. Right? So my remarks are going to be very, very brief. I'm assuming that there are some of the students in the audience who are going through questions of, what is it that I really want to do with my life? I find this thing interesting, but is it really something that I can make a career out of? Is it really a legit thing to study? What are the places I can go to learn something about history in an interesting way? And allied questions. Now, a while back, it was that I was in school, and at that time, at least in the milieu that I belonged to, the city that I was in, the schools that I went to, history was very much a peripheral subject. Maya talked about these textbooks and the kinds of names and dates that you had to memorize. So obviously we had these exams with the picture of the Buland Darwaza, and the questions were, what is this? When was it built? Who built it? Right? That was the kind of approach we had to history a lot of the time. Other times we were, just trying to remember, give 5 reasons why this happened, or give 4 reasons why this happened. And those 4 reasons were reasons that were in the textbook, not reasons that we were trained to think about and come up with ourselves. Having said that, I still found history very, very interesting, maybe because I was I had an inclination towards it. But the real motivation to study history came from experiences outside the classroom. I used to hang out in my uncle's room, reading old magazines, which talked about cricket tours of the 1950s and 1960s, these yellowing pages, partly eaten up by insects. And I had this feeling of being in a different time, imagining what things must have been like before, imagining what the world must have been like in those pictures. Those pictures were black and white, but I knew in my head the world was in color. But these representations, they impact how we view a certain period in history. And part of the charm of history is trying to transcend that feeling of inaccessibility. I want to know what it was like. It's not possible to know exactly, but we can make an endeavor through our techniques as historians to try and find out. This is not only because we have a crazy sort of interest in vague things like what happened in 1942, or that we're interested in in all the different models of locomotives, though that is a legitimate interest as well. History does not need to be only about terrifyingly serious things like wars, or famines or other things, though those are important to understand. As a historian, you could study the history of sport, you could study the history of cinema, you could study the history of whatever aspect of life you find yourself really interested in. And here's where I come to what history has done for me. It's helped me to understand areas of life which otherwise I thought I could not understand easily. I went on to study engineering because in my school there was no option to study arts. You had to either do science or commerce, and I think this is familiar to many students still in this country. And after that, all my classmates were writing the IIT JEE exam. Almost all of us went into engineering programs. And I spent those 4 years trying to understand what it is that an engineer does. I learned how to solve problems. I learned how to do diagrams. I learned how to do various little experiments. But the larger context of what is this thing called engineering? Why do we do it? What is its role in society? Sort of slipped me by. And that's what sort of brought me back to my interest growing up. And I decided to look at the history of science, technology, engineering, and fields like this. And I ended up doing a PhD which looked at the history of the engineering profession in India. And I must say that having looked at how these professions and how these projects and how these different identities that engineers identified themselves with grew over time, this is the element of time that Maya stressed, helped me to understand much better some of the things that I should have understood while learning engineering. The element of time is very, very crucial because, for one, it lends itself to narratives, which our brains are programmed to understand in a more easy way. For another, historians can look at things in the past, sometimes in a more complete way than they can in the present. And this sounds counterintuitive because we have more, we're closer to the present, but very often we don't have access to all kinds of data about the present because the people interested, the people involved are there and they will not let you have access to it. But if you are talking about something that happened 100 years ago, you can look at angles that are not available for a more recent event. And that gives you a more complete understanding of how things work. History is also something that enables you to pick out things that are microcosm of larger issues in our current world. And for all these reasons, I found that history has not only given me a job that I like, calling a position to be able to explore and try to understand important facets of our past, but it's also really enabled me to make more sense of my world. When I read something in the news, when I see a new institution come up, when I see some particular policy decision being taken, I feel that I can understand much better the larger ramifications, why something is the way it is, and so on. I'm going to stop here because we have several other things to discuss today, but I'm sure that there'll be many questions that my colleagues and I will be happy to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aprajit. That was something that I can relate so much to. I started in science as well. Of course, I wasn't that great a student of mathematics, so I couldn't really become an engineer. But I can totally understand how we are pushed into those sort of directions, and it's a personal journey that I also can very much talk about a bit. But let's just go to the question of the programmatic part of this conversation. We've been talking a little bit about why history and what is history and why it is significant for all of us to make sense of it. Now let's just talk a little bit about how do we do history at Ahmedabad. What is our own understanding of it? So I would like Professor Manmohini to talk a little bit about that. She will hopefully give you a broader outline of our programs.
Thank you, Rahul. But I can see Professor French here. We are very lucky to have him here today. He's extremely busy schedule and he has decided to drop by. And because we are doubly lucky because Professor French is also a historian and the dean. So this transition from the intellectual joys of doing history and to the programs and how we do history. Perhaps, Patrick, could you please say a few words before I get into the boring part?
Well, it's definitely not the boring part. I've enjoyed everything so far, and I'm sure I'll enjoy the next presentations. The only thing I'd really like to say, which does connect to the point of being somebody with a background in writing history and biography, who then becomes the dean of a very eclectic School of Arts and Sciences, is that, you know, the one thing that I have found, having to span different academic areas, different intellectual areas, that might be physics, it might be life sciences, it might be trying to understand areas like bioinformatics or data science, let alone the elements of the social sciences or performing and visual arts that we also teach, is the fact that I do think that a training in history and in other areas of the humanities like philosophy gives you very good powers of reasoning and logic, and it makes you good at asking questions. You know, sometimes you may ask too many questions, but I think it does give you a certain analytical ability, which can be very valuable, whether somebody wants to go into law or the civil service or public policy or a whole range of different professions. And of course, history links to everything. You know, I'm very much a believer in the idea that, you know, to paraphrase William Faulkner, that, you know, the past is not even past, that history is not even past. Anything that you look that's happening globally right now, or anything that you look that is happening in India right now, so often geopolitical events are tied up with things that happened many centuries before. So really, that's my only, you know, real contribution that I wanted to make, was to say that whatever your other areas of specialization, you know, whatever you decide you want to major in or minor in, or whatever you want to decide that, you know, will be the main function of your university education, that the analytical skills that come from history, asking the right questions and then leading on to subsequent questions, being able to assess large amounts of written information at high speed and make deductions from them, those are all things that can come out of a history degree or a history course, a major, a minor, or an individual course. So I'm happy further on to answer any questions that our guests and visitors might have, but that's my contribution for the moment. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So Rahul, I will now talk a little bit about the way we thought about this program. And all the things that Professor Jasanoff, my colleagues here mentioned is all in our thinking, right? This is how we think about history. And this is how we have thought of the program when we designed it. If I remember correctly, our program brochures, first thing they say is, it's not about dates. If you go to our website, the Ahmedabad University website, in the history section, the history page under the School of Arts and Sciences, that's one of the things we say, that it's really not about dates, but at the same time, as Professor Jasanoff said, it is about time. The first thing historians think about is the context of something where, for example, if I don't know how many of you follow Sanskrit here, but I'll just say something in Sanskrit from an early legal text, and I'll translate it later. Okay, and this is just from my memory, so just bear with me if I go wrong. Pita rakshati kaumare, bharta rakshati yavane, rakshanti sthavire putra, na stri swatantraya marhati. What that means is really somebody, a father, guards her or protects her, however you translate that word, in her childhood. Her husband protects her in her youth. Her sons protect her when she is older. A woman is never qualified to act independently, right? So this is from a huge age-old text. Doesn't matter where it's from, it's irrelevant. But why would somebody write something like this in a legal text, if I can use the word legal very loosely, is the question. If you cherry pick and pick out this little thing and say this is how the author thinks about women, no, well, then I would know you're not a historian. Okay, so yes, so it is about time, but at the same time, it is about context. It is also, to a certain extent, understanding that even though it's about context, it is just that you don't really need to know that specific date. Perhaps you all are in school, you may have memorized dates, and please do that, that's fine. But I am just saying that the way we have thought about the program here is for you to understand the complexity of things, to, if possible, try to see things as they were in the past. It is difficult because you are a product of this time, wherever you're born, you're a product of something. But nevertheless, if you have certain tools, you would be able to understand and see that. So it's very, it's lovely to see all of you here, because we didn't know that this would be, we would be visited by so many young people. It's great. It's just that my presentation just talks about the history minor, because that's what I knew I would be talking about. But I will, because all of you are here, I will say a little bit about how generally we planned the program. Okay, so the way we thought is that whoever is interested to study history comes to us. They know about few things. They know about the Indian history, okay, because we're a school here in India, and we would very much like to offer a history of India. But at the same time, we are also a part of the connected world, as Professor Jasanoff very beautifully showed you a globe. The globe was rotating, I saw. We are connected. So we don't just want you to think that this is it. Our history is it, and whatever we know is the final word. No. So we have a global set of courses, a global cluster, we call it. Okay, so let's say you're studying. So I study early India. Okay, so let's say you're studying early India. Not only do we want you to know about ancient India, medieval India, or modern India, which all of my colleagues here do. Professor Sarvate does modern India, Professor Jha does medieval India, I do early India. So we want you to know about that, sure. But we also want you to know what's happening in other parts of the world as well at that time. And also to try and make connections if you could. It is hard. It's not as easy as I'm making it sound, because that is why you need the dig. Otherwise, you can do it anywhere. The Google God is there. So if you need to do that, just find out information. Google God is ever present. But we teach you how to think. Okay, and so this is how we connect our India and global cluster. And then the methods to do that, how you approach that, is a set of courses we offer in the methods cluster. Okay, so I gave an example from this early Sanskrit text. Should we then just say that this is this guy or this woman, whoever wrote the text, thinks of women that way? Should we do that? What are the ways we try and understand where that statement is coming from? Okay, so that is an idea that our method cluster attempts to give you. So when you come to us as a major in history, then we try to give you a fair idea from all these three angles. Additionally, we offer you the electives, okay? Things that you may want to do, may want to learn about more within the scope of history. Apart from this, we have the university-wide program, which is very eclectic, as Professor French said. And I am not going to talk about that part because I'm focusing my energy on the history part. So I will just share a presentation and you'll see this is what I spoke about. So, well, as I said, I just thought I'd speak about the minor, but I've already given you, this is, so the minor is in a smaller form than the major, right? So whatever we do in the major is a larger version of the minor. So that's simply it. So if you're interested in either, that is fine. Okay, so these are the things my colleagues who spoke before me, they spoke about these things, and I will not read them out. You can see it here. It is pretty self-evident. By the example, I've told you some of how it's done. So I will not read out. Please see what is, but clearly, you know, evidence is crucial. Evidence and how you interpret that evidence, and that's how you need those several tools to do that. How you synthesize that information, so critical thinking. So how you analyze something, how you make sense of the tremendous, as Professor French was referring to, the tremendous amount of information. That is the how do you pull out the right ones and then make your story, then weave a little narrative. And Professor Jasanoff mentioned that one of the things is that the main thing in history is the story. What is your story, right? So, so something like this. Now I want to just highlight one part. We at our university are doing getting it, and Professor Sarvate can speak later about this a little bit, Rahul, if you would. So we collaborate for a couple of courses with Princeton University. I'm sure you've heard of Princeton. It's one of the top universities in the world. And they offer some global courses, which we partner with. And Patrick, maybe you can just say something on that, because you would be able to say it better.
Sure. So this is the Global History Lab, which is run by Princeton University. And it's a large course, I mean, a super large course taught by Professor Jeremy Edelman, who, I personally think theoretically is very interesting, or he's very interesting in the theory that he has of future directions that global history and our understanding of it could and should go. And what they do is that they have a tie-up with, I think, about 20 or 20 universities globally to enable students to take this course online. Some of it is through videos and some of it is through seminars. And you also then have a teaching associate accompanying the class who's supplied by Princeton University. And Ahmedabad University is the only university in India that has been approved by Princeton in order to be part of the Global History Lab course. So this is really an extraordinary opportunity for Ahmedabad students. You get credit in the Princeton system, credit in the Ahmedabad system, and those courses are fully transferable. So it's a great learning opportunity, and I feel very, very glad, very lucky that we are able to be part of it.
Thank you, Patrick. Rahul, perhaps when I'll just go through the logistics of the thing and I'll pass it over to you. If you could just draw on the Princeton thing a little bit after that. Okay. So, and the last thing is the structure here. So we want you to, never mind about the minor thing here. We just want you to take a certain amount of courses from each cluster, as I explained earlier. And that is basically it. In case you are here for the minor, this is the structure, total of 6 courses, 1 each from each cluster, India Global Methods, and any 3 of your choice, history courses. Okay, so that is it. Major is just a bigger version of this. And we don't need to get into these boring matters right now. These are something we can deal with should you be here. Okay, all right. That is it. I'll just unshare screen, and we are all here. Very happy to answer any questions that you might have, if we can answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manmohini. I know some of these are indeed mundane and boring aspects of the program, but I'm sure we will all cater to the questions if anyone has any questions regarding the precise logistics of the program as such. So let me open this session for questions and answers for everyone. Please type your questions or raise hands so that we will know you have a question for any of us. So I see something in a chat box. Chitrakshi is asking if Princeton collaboration is more like a physical exchange for one course, or is it an online semi-recorded, semi-live course? Right, as Professor French mentioned, it's essentially the course is part of a large network. There are a number of institutions across the globe from where students will be participating in the class. So the class is essentially online, which is, as you put quite aptly, semi-recorded and semi-live course at the moment.
By the way, I'll just pipe up for a minute about the Princeton course, which is to say that even though I teach at Harvard and have plenty of loyalty to my institution, Princeton is easily one of the top, well, I'll say top 2 history departments in the United States, Harvard, of course, being the other, but it's a superb program. And they've been building up this global network for a number of years. And the people involved on the Princeton side, I know, are really fantastic. And it really is quite a great opportunity for Ahmedabad students to be involved in that.
Absolutely. Thank you. There's another question about do you offer placements? Now, we don't offer placements as such. We're planning to sort of think in terms of internships for history students in different sites of historical research, including museums, archives. So think in those terms rather than, so this works a little differently, right? So it's rather than a management program. There is another question from Sriyansh Pujari. Does the program have anything to do with history consultancy? Now, would anyone like to take this one? I'm not very sure what does he mean by history consultancy?
Yeah, I could, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, there are some firms which are set up and which help businesses or governments with some kind of research which feeds into their concerns, right? So I know, for instance, in India, there are many private companies which undertake to set up archives for, sorry about that, for business houses. They help business houses catalog their materials, set up archives. Sometimes they use that for their current ad campaigns by using historical materials, or else you could have a historical consultancy who's hired to give you a brief report about something. So as a graduate in history, you could very well go into one of those jobs. It's not something that we specifically train you for, but we give you, all the skills to be a good historian. You will also, remember, be taking several other courses in other disciplines while you're here in Ahmedabad University, including business. So you should be able to combine all of that to go into the kind of career you want.
Right. Thank you so much, Aprajit, for this. This, I think, there are archives by business houses as well, if I'm not wrong. Godrej has one archive in Mumbai. So one can also seek those places in terms of possible employment as well.
Can I just, if we're talking about employment, it might be of interest to some of the students to know that, media and communications, of course, is such a fast growing sector right now in India. And I imagine some of you on this call are quite interested in that. History is a really superb preparation for any kind of career in a communications facing position, whether that be communications directly in a, let's say an advertising agency, or whether it be an in-house position with a different kind of company. And the reason that it's so good for this, I think, is because you do develop two kinds of skills in great, with great rigor. One of those sets of skills is analytical and critical thinking. And the other one is good writing and presentation. And, often that is exactly the combination that will most mark out people for success in future careers of this sort. If you're simply doing a communications degree, you might not get the kind of rigor of data analysis or close examination of sources or rich understanding of contexts, which after all, a lot of messaging has to do with contexts. On the flip side, if you're just doing a degree, more on, let's say, the business side, perhaps your ability to work closely on writing skills might not be as strong as it would be through a history preparation. So I think it's just important to consider that a history degree actually fits you out for a very wide range of positions in the broader sort of, social and business sectors than the term history perhaps invites you to think.
Just one thing I think I would like to interject here. I think so at Ahmedabad, history program here at Ahmedabad University is unique also in the sense that we weave interdisciplinarity into our history program. So for example, once you join the university, you will be doing foundation program, attending different studios, and while you are here, you are allowed to take courses from different disciplines. And that adds to your skill set, and see the history from, truly into multidisciplinary perspective. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Sorry.
Excellent. Thank you, Murari. I think this is a very important point about this program. This is rooted in the interdisciplinary paradigm as such. And so therefore, we don't treat history as something that has nothing to do with social sciences or natural sciences. So there is a dialogue that we constantly seek with other disciplines from the vantage point of history. I think, Manmohini, would you like to take the next two questions, which are, I think one is about the program and one is about archaeology and museology. Do you all have an access to questions?
No, you can sum them up.
Let me read them out. So the first question is about, so do we have a choice to double major in history and other subjects, for example, pol science or economics at the university? This is one. And the other question is, what are the opportunities for students interested in archaeology and museology?
Sure. I'll just try to answer. We have been thinking about double majors, but I don't think, and Patrick, you can correct me if I'm mistaken, I don't think it is possible right now, or I don't know, it is possible.
Yeah, I better jump in. It is now possible as of actually just the last few months. So you can now take a dual major in, for example, history and economics, history and psychology. There are some restrictions about what can be a dual, but in general, in principle, if you've got high grades and you're admitted by the relevant faculty, then it is from now on possible to do that, yes.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, as you can see, we move very fast in our university, and very happily, because I knew about a discussion about this, but well, the dean says it's done, so it's done. But you can also double minor. So let's say you choose a discipline, history may be your second love, who knows, but you can also, you can major in a discipline, and what I was talking about, you can minor, and you can also dual minor. Let's say you minor in history and you minor in psychology, or minor in history, minor in some other discipline, economics, so things like that. So, okay, let me, so that the first question is answered. We don't offer courses on archaeology at the moment, but museums, I'll just talk a little bit about museums. And, if you are from Ahmedabad, you know that Ahmedabad University is right next to the LD Museum. And we take, I have actually taken my students, and I think Professor Jha has also taken students for field trips to the LD Museum. And there may be possibilities of internships there. So this is what I know so far. And I would request anybody to send all their questions to Professor Sarvate so that he can just moderate it, because I have somebody directly writing to me about career prospects after graduating from the institution. I understand you mean career prospects in history, right?
So if I could just add in one other point.
If I can actually add, and sorry, Professor French. I think a lot of students come from very diverse backgrounds. Many of them are first generation college goers. Many of them are looking for employment right after a degree. So if you were to sort of summarize, with a major in history and a minor in another subject that, whether it's from engineering or management or arts and sciences, what are some of the, career prospects that students can look at across industries? Thank you.
No, I mean, that's what you've just asked, Vikram, is a super important point. And it's completely understandable that almost every student and their families are going to be thinking, if we do this degree, what are our employment possibilities in the future, particularly bearing in mind the risks of jobless growth and a lack of employment in many areas. How are they equipped and how are they skilled? And I think that probably maybe Professor Jasanoff and Professor Ramnath can both address that from slightly different angles. The only other point I was just going to jump in on a little bit was to mention about the fact that we do now have a course in development out of the Performing and Visual Arts division, which will look at the idea of curation and making an archive and retaining materials in both digital form and analog form from a new professor who is joining during the course of this year, who's not yet been announced. So that's a little way down the line, but it will happen. But maybe if I could just go over to my colleagues to answer that very important point that Vikram Patel just brought in for us.
Well, I'll repeat what I said earlier about media and communications being one very obvious area that I think a history degree would fit you out for. In the UK, for example, it's extremely common to find that people in journalism hold history degrees. In the US, I think it's increasingly common for people in various kind of advertising and social media kinds of roles to have come from a history background. I accept that in any such position, you would obviously need to, explain to people why your degree fits you out to do that job. But I think that that's important no matter what you seek to do in life. And I think that coming, with a liberal arts degree from Ahmedabad, the selling point, your USP, would be that you have, as I already mentioned, this kind of double training in a kind of analysis and critical thinking, and also in a kind of communications, of course, particularly in English, which would be of great value. So that's one arena that jumps out. I mean, for what it's worth, I don't want to speak out of turn here because, of course, I'm not as familiar with the Indian system. But I will say that, generally speaking, positions in sort of nonprofits of different sorts, kind of social enterprise, that's an area as well in which history degrees tend to be of value in certainly the UK and the US systems that I'm familiar with. I think that, there are various forms of the cultural sector, beyond journalism or something like that, in which you might find good employability. I'll turn to Aparajit, though, who could perhaps speak a little more about the relationship between, for example, history and management consulting or other such positions.
One quick answer that I can think of as a career prospect with a degree in history is to become a historian. I mean, we can of course become a lot of things. The point here is that being a historian is also a valuable thing in this country. We require sound, good, people who have training in history, who know how to do, as Maya just said, who have some excellent training in analytical and intellectual understanding of the past and the present. It is something that is not, don't have that in large commodities at the moment. So becoming a historian itself is a very, very valuable thing. Having said that, of course, there are a number of other things that one can do with that kind of the context in history. And as we have also mentioned, it's a degree that is rooted in interdisciplinarity. So it is also going to give you some other kind of training in social sciences, methodologies in social sciences. You will be trained with a range of other students across other disciplines in the foundation studies program, so on and so forth. So there are a number of ways in which you're not going to be, some kind of a remnant of the past. You're actually going to be able to engage with the range of methodologies across natural sciences, social sciences, and the humanities and languages. So think about it in little more dynamic terms than the way in which my parents used to think about my education.
Yeah, indeed, Rahul. I would completely agree that we need historians in India because nowadays, everybody claims to be a historian. So we need professional historians. But in terms of profession, I think, as has been mentioned by Maya, I think here also in India, I know at least half dozen my classmates who are in journalism nowadays from JNU. So in different, the Hindu, for example, and the Wire and elsewhere. So they are working as journalists, media and communication is one field. But so that trend seems to be peaking in India as well. So history graduates generally go to media and communications. Museums is something that you can think of. You can become archivist. Archivists, we need to preserve our documents and heritage in different sites. But beyond that, I think even it seems businesses are hiring history trained undergraduates to help them make certain business decisions in India. So that trend is also picking up. Beyond that, we have you have prospects of becoming a history teacher or taking civil services, for example, as your career option. So I think that there are multiple, and publishing houses are always looking for history graduates actually to help them with publishing processes. So
Thanks a lot, Murari, for this. But there are a number of other questions that are piling up. So let me quickly go to some of these questions. I think Mahita Sakia is asking, are there any courses for art history? If so, how would it be differentiated from history of art? I think this question should go to the dean, no?
Okay, yeah, so I wouldn't make any distinction between art history and history of art. So yes, there are some courses that are upcoming in this area. And that's something that as we develop the integrated arts program, which will be happening during this year, that will be a master's and a Bachelor of Arts in integrated arts. There will be more faculty and more courses that will connect to the idea of history of art, both in terms of global art and Indian art and cultural practice and so on. Just sort of one other additional point about the idea of the employability that can come from a history minor or a history major. I think, it is good, of course, to have more trained historians, but given that that will only be a limited number of people in the end, although, a not insubstantial number, I think one way for students or potential students at Ahmedabad to think about it is, as has already been outlined, the multiple different ways in which it benefits you doing your job. If you talk to people in industry, in companies, one of the things they often say is we get applications and we're thinking we should take somebody, they've got quite a good academic qualification on paper. But then when we hire them, they cannot give a presentation. They cannot articulate an argument in words on the page or in speaking. They cannot reason and argue logically with the points that are being made in a meeting. So I think that the kind of myriad skills that come from training in history, whether it's at the level of a minor or a series of history courses or a major, really can be useful across the board. I mean, people have talked about different areas from management, policy to the civil service to law. A lot of lawyers, before they did a law degree, did a history degree. I also think that if you look at the creative industries in India as a whole, this is a very substantial set of industries. You look at certain cities, you look at Mumbai, you look at Bangalore, and different creative industries. You look at the huge demand for streaming services and films and series out of India. There's a big emphasis there on the need for history and also the need not to distort history. And so I think that there's a kind of, there's an appetite really for the very broad skills that come from being a student, being a historian as a student.
Thank you, Patrick, for this.
Just add a quick point. One other way to think of a history degree is, of course, one is the kind of jobs you can get immediately after it. But if you are thinking of also getting a postgraduate degree, which many of you will be, you may be thinking of a postgraduate degree in a professional discipline like law or management, history can be a very, very good preparation for that. Many lawyers, especially, thinking of the Indian context, if you've read any of the judgments recently, they all have to delve into history, and they really need to have a good understanding of the different facets involved in a particular situation. They have to go back to what happened 100 years ago, 150 years ago, to make sense of things. So some of these degrees, which you do as a postgraduate degree, and if you're going into an MBA today, for instance, arts graduates are quite highly prized because there's so few of them, right? You go into an IIM or any other, even our management program, you find that the majority of students are from an engineering or science background, and people have realized that they want to have a diversity of views. This combination can be very, very effective. So history is, of course, great if you want to be a historian. It's also a worthy preparation for other things, which you may already have in mind. But if you're going to spend your undergraduate degree, doing something and then doing something else that is going to lead to a job, you might as well spend those first few years really doing something that you love, but which also gives you excellent skills.
Excellent, thank you. In fact, that would connect to another question, which is about how do you inculcate quality research work amongst your students? And this is, of course, in some sense we've been talking about that would prepare you for many wider sort of career choices. So I think one important ways and one important aspect of our program is method that we follow in terms of whether it's a seminar course or a lecture course. We make our students read closely. The close reading of text is one important skill that is going to benefit you. And this is something that I have also been mentioning to my students in many of the courses that I taught, that reading a text is a skill in itself. And if you can master that skill, I think that will serve you everywhere in whatever field that you go to. So the other thing that we do, of course, is to make them write. So they write papers, whether it's a term paper, a full-fledged long paper. They do some amount of minor research in there towards the end of their degree. So the final year, they will write a thesis. So rigorous writing and reading of complex texts will actually prepare them and inculcate this ability to do significant and original research in their own right.
May I add something to that?
Yes, please.
So just to add to what Professor Sarvate said, we make our students read quality articles or books. So you cannot possibly write well if you are not well read. Both these skills are sort of interrelated. So we make them read, and we are very careful in training our students how to do evidence-based reasoning. Okay, so they just don't write what they want to write. And we have had several, we go through several drafts to make something, acceptable. And so, yes, so this is very important. If you don't like to read, it would be a little difficult for you.
Manmohini, I hope you're not terrifying the prospective students by...
No, it shouldn't be terrifying. You read stuff. You read stuff off some physical papers or digital journals. It's just that. It's where you're reading stuff off from the source. The source is important.
So let me quickly go to, because we're running out of time, let me quickly go to the next question, which is from Tanisha Sharma. She's asking, I'm interested in both history and political science and can't choose between them. I don't want to go in government offices for job. What should I do? So what should Tanisha do? Anybody has a quick
Well,
response?
I think we all have the same answer, Tanisha. We think that you should do history, I think pretty clearly. But I'll tell you why I say that to students who come to me with the same question in the US, which is that basically history is everything, and everything eventually, or more or less approximately, is history. You can study, if you were to study, for example, political science, government, you would be studying the nature of international relations and domestic affairs through a particular lens. And you would be encouraged to, for example, build models or apply models to explain complex processes. Now, this is an appealing subject because, first of all, it appears to relate very directly to matters of power, which is something people are interested in, and also because it appears to give you a sort of quick fix answer to very complex problems. You sort of you look at the complexity of the world and you say, well, here's my model, and you plunk your model down, and then you get your answer or your interpretation. The problem with that is that quick fixes rarely are sufficient, I think, to really provide us with robust answers to very complex challenges and problems. And so what I think that history has to offer for people who are interested in, for example, power, is that it, first of all, understands power to operate on a whole variety of scales and in a whole variety of ways. So, there might be the level of the government of a nation, or for that matter, governments across nations and international relations. But power also operates on the level of, say, the family. It operates on the level of an institution such as the one that we're all part of right now. And so, you will get a richer understanding of a theme like that. Same, by the way, goes for economics. People are interested in wealth and money. Well, again, that can be studied on many, many levels. The other thing that history will give you, however, is a set of approaches to how to understand the workings of states and governments and people with power and people without power that is not model reliant. History is a process that is too complex to model, right? And we live in a world that is ultimately too complex to model, as many recent kinds of events have shown. So I think that you could view history as the kind of broader sort of envelope within which a discipline like political science sits. And I think that it might give you a richer set of perspectives from which to approach the kinds of problems that it seems like you might be interested in without boxing you in. And particularly because you don't want to go into government service, I say keep your options open, study history.
Thank you so much, Maya, for this very elaborate answer to Tanisha. There are a number of questions, so let's be very quick about this. Chitrakshi is saying, if we get into the university in an early cycle round, by when do we have to commit?
That is a question for admissions team. Mr. May I please request you to answer that?
Yes, absolutely. So we have 4 cycles of admission, right? We have 3 early and 1 regular. And unlike most, Indian universities, you don't have to wait for your board results to come out to apply to us, because we admit students on a very holistic basis. We look at your entire application. So the first round, unfortunately, is over. The second round deadline is 18th of February. If you're interested, you can apply by then. And if shortlisted, there is a personal interaction that's scheduled with faculty, and we like to call it an interaction. It's not really an interview. So that happens, and post that, by the end of February, you will know whether you have an offer. It can be a conditional offer, but it will be an offer nevertheless.
Thank you, Vikram.
Rahul, if I could just say something, just going back to Tanisha's question, and I think several others who might have this this question of, I have another interest apart from history. What do I do? At a very logistical level, I'd like to just point out that we have, our undergraduate program is worth 120 credits, out of which 60 credits come from your major. The remaining 60 credits are for you to, there are some constraints, but you can really explore many other disciplines. And our university has a whole wide range of disciplines from management to engineering to science, biological sciences, to mathematics and physics, social and political sciences, performing and visual arts is coming up. So you will have the option to use that half of your degree to really explore your interests in ways that can fit with your major.
Thanks, Aprajit. I just wanted to quickly add to that. We have an engineering student who's a history minor. So our university curriculum is very flexible in these terms. We are really interdisciplinary in that sense. You really explore, as my colleague Aprajit said. So just wanted to.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so while we have, sorry, Rahul, if I can.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So while we have this inbuilt flexibility in our structure, in our program's structure at the university, within a course, you're allowed to explore your interest within the confines of the syllabus. So that is another, that is like allowing your interest to actually get the direction and take the real interest in writing, for example, an assignment, right? And that ensures the quality within the parameter that we operate for a course. And I just quickly like to add that we are in a historical city, right? We run a course called Ahmedabad as a global gateway, right? Gateway to the world. And we take students to different historical sites, which are here in the city itself. But we also take students to Lothal, for example, which is 2 hours from here. And there are many historical. So when there was a question about archaeology, so it's not always about digging and then finding something from beneath the earth, but also some of the structure that we have, for example, of the East India Company in Surat. Those are also archaeological remains that we take our students to observe, to make sense of, to interpret that time and their activities.
Yeah, thank you, Murali. There are two questions that I would like to address together. Both of these questions are about making wiser choices. What would be a good choice as a combination between major and minor? One question is about international relations and history, and the other question is about media studies and history. But this other question also has an interesting component. The question, if I read it fully, says I want to pursue media as a career, but I'm also curious to learn history as a subject, not as a career. Can that happen simultaneously? So let me first of all say that we are open to personal conversations with you. If you would like to do that, you can set up appointments with us as faculties. We are very happy to respond to your queries of these kinds. Some of these queries may require substantial conversations about identifying your actual precise interest, because sometimes you're just influenced by what others are doing and you think that this is what you want to do. But with a conversation with a faculty or somebody who's part of that field can actually enlighten you a little bit more. So we are open to those kinds of conversations if you are interested in doing that. And let me just quickly add a point from my own understanding of what I do when I say to the world that I do history. It is, I think, important to understand the wider concerns and questions that we have, apart from being a professor in a university setup where I do professional duties as a historian and as a professor. But there is something that actually in the first place made me curious about history, right? That led to this intellectual inquiry. We want to keep this spirit alive. This is an intellectual inquiry which stimulates us to read, to reflect upon, to discuss, and to arrive at a certain kind of understanding. That understanding, of course, is essentially an interpretation, which is a position that you arrived at after a substantial engagement with other opinions, other points of views, through texts, through people. And that is an ability, I think, that cannot be quantified easily. I would not be able to tell you the quantity of work that, I mean, to quantify how much do I interpret, how do I read, and how do I discuss. And so those are the things that you internalize over a period of time that you might not be able to visualize at the first year of your BA. By the time you actually graduate, you realize how much you have learned, which you might not actually have imagined at the first year, right? There is another question, which is a slightly conceptual question. I think it is, what exactly does it mean to be a historian? And I think I did try to answer that partly. Is it limited to being a professor? That's the other part of the question. And so this is also what I wanted to reflect upon, that of course being a professor is a professional sort of commitment that you do, but it is also far more wider, and then you participate in an inquiry that is intellectual, that is also political to a great extent, is also very personal, and yet the kind of professional aspect of it also enables you to be very objective about this engagement with history or ideas. All right, I'm not sure if this actually is going to be a very satisfactory answer at the end, but if any one of you would like to say a word or two about this.
This seems like a great closing question on which we should all be, each of us, required to give a brief answer and then wrap this up. So it was, what is it to be a historian? I would say what it is to be a historian is to be a lifelong student of the human condition.
Wonderful. Excellent. Patrick, I think Aparajit has forwarded you a question. If you can.
Yeah, there was a question that came in, which was, is the campus LGBTQ plus friendly? And the answer to that, yes, is that we are a liberal institution. The law has changed and it recognizes the fact that people will have different sexual orientations. And I think we're fully supportive of that as an institution. I'd actually make a wider point, which is that in terms of student well-being and student mental health, the university is very definite that any kind of ragging or bullying or harassment of not just students, but really anybody within the institution is not accepted. That can be over what community somebody comes from, what language they're speaking. It can be a gender-related thing, a sexuality-related thing. I would say that in general, there's always an approach that the well-being of the students and of faculty and of staff should be protected. And the university acts quite swiftly if there's any kind of transgression in that area.
Thank you, Patrick. I think we're running out of time, but I would like to take this one last question and then we can stop here, which is, would you as professors of history encourage students to do majors in history and make a career other than professor teacher? What are other career options for those with a history major? Now, back to the same point, so this question in some sense completes the circle for us. We've been talking about this, right? And as I mentioned earlier, you can of course become a historian, but if not, you can of course become anybody that you want. That is also what I would like our students to discover as part of their academic journey. Sometimes you want to, you have decided something at the very beginning, and you, like Aparajit narrated about his own story, engineering, from engineering to history, and those sorts of divergence, if one can call them, are not unusual. I think that they also reflect the fact that you are a changing and reflecting individual. You're thinking and you're realizing that you're changed and you want to go in another direction. That is, all of these are possibilities now with the liberal art institutions and universities in India. Those earlier rigid distinctions between art, science, and commerce no longer exist. So you can actually have exposure to a number of methods, a number of teachers, a number of disciplines as you do a degree at a graduate level. And I hope that that kind of answers your question. We of course encourage our students to be what they want to be. I think we would like to then stop here for today. It was
just one quick thing for anybody who is interested in the in the course curriculum for the history major, please, you're very welcome to visit our website. Please look at our website. It would give you the necessary details about the university curriculum, and within that, the history major, as Aprajit said, that 60 credits towards the major and 120 credits in general for the arts. And what are the things you can do? So you need to first take a look, and please feel free to reach out to us once you take a look.
Yes, please feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have any further question or anything else that you want to have a comment about. So thank you so much to everyone, particularly Maya and Patrick and other colleagues here in history. Thanks a lot. I would also like to thank Vikram and everyone else from the admissions team for their efforts. Thank you so much.